says...
Mouthwashing is a horrible experience. Of course it is, right? It's a horror game. But the reason it became the indie horror darling of 2024 is often lost on a lot of people. Now, I'm not saying there haven't been some great analyses of this game already. There have been tons. I'm a big fan of Stephanie Sterling's take on it, from the perspective of someone who has spent long periods of time lying in agony, unable to move or help yourself. Then there's its not-so-subtle commentary on capitalism, derived from the fact that the only reason any of these events even happen is because a corporation wanted to transport mouthwash from one side of the galaxy to the other, then fires them anyway because they see humans as expensive waste even though they're paying them next to nothing.
I think this is
From the beginning of writing this script, there are probably tons more insightful takes that I haven't even been able to keep up with. The one take I haven't seen is the one I want to talk about today. Yes, the characters are flawed and feel very real. Yes, the horror of being trapped in a broken body is disturbing. Yes, both characters you spend time playing as are bad people. All this is known. But what I haven't seen, asked by any of these takes so far, is what we can learn from this little indie horror game that took the world by storm. What can we learn from the story of survivors trapped in deep space, and applying it to those who feel trapped here on Earth? The idea that games are art is not a new one. Even back in the days of the ZX Spectrum, you could find games that made you think and understand something rather than just occupy your time. What's often left unsaid about art in general, and what distinguishes it from the slop produced by AI to trick boomers into thinking their fever dreams are real, is that art is, almost without exception, about saying something. Communicating a desire, an emotion, a political idea, even just a sensation, is necessary for art to be considered art, in my opinion. After the First World War, the art world became a movement of abstracts. People who moved away from the idea of painting something realistically and moved to painting ideas in form of abstract shapes. With the art establishment being what it was at the time, a lot of this stuff wasn't really taken seriously as real art, but it does have something to say, even if it's more difficult to perceive than someone just painting a riverside. Take this Pablo Picasso painting, for example. It's one of his most famous and most striking for a reason. It's called Guernica, and it explains in ways that words probably couldn't the horrors of what it was like to be in a specific place at a specific time, specifically Guernica, when it was bombed by certain fascist leaders that YouTube doesn't like you to name directly in 1937. The mangled limbs, the screams of pain and loss, the confusion and chaos of war, all these things are here in this single image. Picasso clearly needed to get this off his chest, to make people understand that when war starts, you have no idea where the road is going to take you, how the violence will affect you, even if you survive. So what are the creators of Mouthwashing trying to get off their chest with this one? That corporations are bad? That's true and based in everything, but also very universal. A lot of people can agree with that, so it feels kind of impersonal. Are they saying things about how it feels to be disabled? Yeah, certainly. But the accident that crippled Captain Curly like that, binding him to the hospital gurney and being treated like a piece of meat, it's a bit out there and far-fetched and amplified for dramatic effect. It still says something, but it feels too abstract for people who haven't been there. For me, however, the real artful message in Mouthwashing is hidden in the characters, their interactions and relationships. The naive Daisuke, whose optimism crumbles slowly over the months of isolation. The cynical Swansea, who, slowly over the course of his life, found that even though he conquered his addictions like a champ, his days of destroy the self and fuck the consequences were probably the best days of his life. Anya, and anxiety-riddled mess who struggles to do the basics of her job, but also has a kind soul underneath. Then we have Curly and Jimmy, who I'll talk about later. There's very little build-up in Mouthwashing. From the very outset, these characters are fully realised, complex, and all speak with a unique voice. If you've ever written or tried to write fiction, you'll know it's very easy to have every character speak similar lines to each other and not really think too much about the language used. Mouthwashing does not have this problem. Why? Because in order to tell the story it's telling, it needs to have each character say things that the other characters never would. Without these different voices, it would be impossible to tell the real story. The story of how horrifying it is to be trapped, alone, in space, helpless, hopeless, and with your abuser. Domestic abuse is an umbrella term that often gets simplified in the minds of the public to mean one thing: a man who beats his wife. The reality on the ground, of course, is something far more sinister and complicated. My primary background is in mental health, but for some time, I also worked in a refuge for domestic abuse survivors. I got to know their stories very well and learned a lot about what an abuser is and looks like in real life. While the image of a man punching his wife around the kitchen for not getting him his beer from the fridge is very striking, there are many more moving parts to the person who produced that image than the fist hitting her in the face. From the outside, people would see that particular visual and say something like, "I would leave that son of a bitch if he laid a hand on bit, blah blah blah." Yes, I know. Of course you would leave that bum. You haven't had months and years of being manipulated, emotionally degraded, constantly undermined, and convinced that you are a thing without value, and that even being noticed by your abuser is too good for you in the first place. Getting out and finally being able to just leave the relationship is as deep and involved a process as it takes to get into that situation in the first place. There's a really good book that's used by counselling programs like Freedom here in the UK. It's called Living with the Dominator by a woman called Pat Craven. It has its flaws, it's pretty heteronormative, and not all of the parts of it will apply equally to everyone, but it does a couple of things really well that make it great reference material for someone looking to run therapy groups on the topic. Firstly, it's very direct. It doesn't use metaphor to tell you what it wants to say. It uses short, simple sentence structures and descriptions of events to speak to the abuses committed by a partner or the family member who lives with you. Every common pattern of manipulation, every trick they try to pull to keep you from leaving, even down to specific opinions the abuser will hold outside of their opinions on you, is related to you in this book in a very blunt manner, and that's what makes it effective. Secondly, it avoids academic or technical terms like gaslighting completely. Seriously, you will never find any language that political morons would call woke in here. It's simply a rote, blunt, impactful description of how an abusive person in your life will try and break you down, while at the same time presenting what the abuser would really be doing if they were half of what they said they were. The reason I love Mouthwashing so much is that it takes this idea of communicating important information in an accessible way and runs with it. It doesn't use the language of complex academic analysis like gaslighting or Darvo to tell its story. It simply presents you with information about the 5 people lost in space, how they behave, how they talk to each other, and lets you learn its lessons without you really noticing that you're learning them. And it's a good thing that it does that, because the lessons it wants you to learn, woven tightly into this packed 2-hour-long horror game, are fucking terrifying. Part of why I didn't discuss Jimmy in my little character synopsis earlier is because it's really hard not to just say he's an abusive piece of shit who deserves to die a far worse death than he actually does.
Why do you have a shotgun?
I just want to talk to him.
Dad, this is ridiculous.
I just want to talk to him. I just want to talk to him. I just want to talk to him.
It is not his fault.
I just want to shoot him. I just want to talk to him.
You can't shoot him.
Wait, what? What are you...
Because in all the complexity of his character, which I'll talk about in a minute, it all comes down to just that in the end. He's an awful human being. A very real and grounded one. and that makes the game much more effective than it would otherwise be. At the start of the story, which is told deliberately out of order, we first encounter him through his own eyes, talking to the crew about the predicament they're in, feeding Curly his painkillers, and going through the symbolic degradation of his mental state along with him. At this point, it's very easy to see Jimmy as a put-upon everyman, trying to fix a situation and keep the crew together in the roughest of times, even though everyone around him is stressed out and acting irrationally to their own detriment. Of course you see him like that. That's what he wants you to see. As the story goes on, you start to see glimpses into who he really is, signs that his self-perception is breaking apart and changing, but also that the reality of his past actions is hidden, deliberately, by him. His arc words during the trippy parts of the game are "take responsibility," words that haunt him constantly because it's something he cannot and will not do. Like most people in real life, even the worst among us, serial killers, fascist leaders, abusers of all kinds, he spends most of his mental energy trying to convince himself that he is a good person on one hand, while trying to erase all the evidence that he is not with the other. The stress that is tearing his mind apart and causing all those wacky puzzle sequences is caused by a cognitive dissonance, or identity dysphoria, if you want. The difference between what he knows he is and what he is trying to convince himself he is. Between what has happened and what is going to happen when people find out about it. You see this in abusers all the time. People who have done terrible things deny they have done them and work overtime to convince you that what you know is all a lie. I've sat alongside domestic abuse survivors in court proceedings, and I've seen people try and do this in real time. Well, I'm just a father who wants to see his children again. I would do anything for my children, and all I ask is... Really, fuckface? You're just a father who wants to spend time with his kids. That's all you are. Because I've got 25 police reports and medical evidence that says you were doing a lot more than that, sunshine. It's hard to describe the rage that fills you when you see abusers try to do this right in front of you. But the words piteous contempt keep popping up in my head, so I'll just use those. If the story of Jimmy and the crew was told in chronological order, it would make for a very different storytelling experience. It would be impossible to consider him as a good person, even for a moment. From the beginning, we would learn that Jimmy is not a put-upon man in a bad situation, as we first suspect. He's a rapist. He forced himself on Anya, and now there is evidence of that in the form of a pregnancy. He has the gall to make sex jokes during psych evaluations to the very same person who he assaulted in the middle of the night. He deliberately crashes the ship into an asteroid, dooming them all to die in space because he found out his actions had a consequence for him that he can no longer worm his way out of. He then blames all this on Curly, the captain who helped him get the job in the first place and treated him like a friend for years, simply because Curly is too messed up to say anything that might prove him wrong at this point, and he's still trying to convince everyone, including himself, that he's a good person. His interactions with all the other characters are further signs of him being an abuser, even beyond his own behaviour. When Anya has a good idea on how to help Curly's pain, Jimmy makes it all about himself by ranting about how hard finding a code scanner is. Whenever something medical comes up, he takes snarky shots at Anya's competence, even though she apparently managed to keep a quadruple amputee with severe burns alive on a ship with no doctors and limited supplies. She was probably the one who changed those bandages for months and prevented him from dying of infection. That shit is hard, trust me. Here's a killer sign right here. He constantly berates Anya for not being a good nurse and not giving Curly his meds, but then when she apologizes and offers to do it, he insists on doing it instead. Why? Because he's such a stand-up guy? No. Is it because he wants Anya to be better at her job? No, not really. If that was the case, he would have just let her do it when she offered, right? No. Taking this opportunity to make her feel worthless, to make her feel weak, to make her feel ashamed, is more important to him than Anya doing her job properly. He doesn't even care that she's not performing the action he wants her to. Not really. To him, it's barely an inconvenience. The outcome he wants from this interaction is her thinking less of herself, to be so concerned with not making him angry that she doesn't do anything to, well, reveal what he did to her. He does something similar with Daisuke, talking him into doing something risky and getting himself killed by manipulating his desire to do the right thing and help out his friends. This is the nature of the abuser. They take advantage of your desire to do good. They lie to you, trick you, betray you, manipulate you, pretend what they're doing is for some greater purpose when really all they're doing is trying to protect their fragile egos from the truth and keeping the truth away from everyone else to avoid taking responsibility. There is a lot of detailed literature that pertains to the thinking patterns of abusers, but a lot of those thinking patterns can be inferred from the actions they take towards their targets. Many abusers have abused animals before, showing their desire to dominate and lack of empathy for things they think of as weak. Many abusers will be terrified that they themselves are weak, and that ego threat is then sated by making someone feel even weaker than them. Many abusers will change their demands of their partners with no consistent reasoning at all. This makes their partner feel trapped in a cone of uncertainty. Like a minefield, you have no idea what movement will set them off. And it shows that the individual upset they feel is not the point. Control is the point. The only person Jimmy doesn't try to control like this is Swansea. Why? Because Swansea isn't insecure about who he is. He's not an easy target like the others because he doesn't take shit. He says what's on his mind and has no fear of Jimmy getting angry with him. This is why when Jimmy finally confronts him, he has to make believe in his mind that he's in a pitched battle against a serial killer when what he's really doing is shooting an unarmed old man. He has to pretend Swansea is a genuine threat, both to justify murdering him and to protect his image of himself as a hero. Even with the literal gun to his head, he still tries to convince Swansea that he's a good man by saying he's going to fix things. He never tries to bully him like he does the others. This is because, unlike Jimmy, Swansea is strong. He's honest with himself. And Jimmy is terrified about what that shows about him. Despite his ability to get his way, to win interactions with others, to take their dignity away to get what he wants, to avoid responsibility, he is still weak. Too weak to confront what he has done. Too afraid of being weak to do the right thing. And he will never stop running from the consequences of his cowardice. There are many people in the world like Jimmy. Not a majority, but enough. You've probably met one. I've had to interact with them in my work life numerous times, and the pattern is always the same. Abusers, even the biggest and scariest of them, are weak people, and they know that. The reason most abusers are men is not a biological propensity to violence like some people claim. It's that men are expected to be strong, and if you know for a fact that you are weak, you will do all you can to hide that from everyone. Abusers spend their entire existence trying to trick themselves out of that knowledge, the knowledge that they are weak, so they can make other people feel weak and feel strong by comparison. But they know that they are. They can't avoid it. Eventually, no matter how fast you run, you'll have to take responsibility, or else it will take you. Just like it did for Curly. You might have noticed I haven't mentioned Captain Curly very much in this video so far, despite him being the literal face of the game. That's because while Jimmy is unambiguously the villain of the story, he's the one who caused this whole thing after all, Curly is not a clear villain or a clear victim. Is the fact that he can no longer do anything except take pain medication and wait to die Jimmy's fault? Yes. Was he forced to watch from his bed as the crew he thought of as his friends died one by one because of Jimmy? Yes. But did he have the power to stop all this? Long before the story even began? Yeah, he really did. The thing with Curly is that he's an all-round decent guy. He's positive, he's upbeat, friendly in a pretty genuine way. Part of the early intrigue of the game is when we play as him, trying to figure out what made this man decide to deliberately crash the ship. Jimmy's made to look better by the time-jumping structure of the story, and Curly is made to look far worse, at least at first. As we progress and learn the truth about Curly's actions, we discover that he is not the villain we thought he was. But we also learn he's something almost as sinister. He's not an abuser, he's an enabler. Now, enablers do not carry out the abuse themselves, and that gives a pretty easy moral escape for people who are enabling abuse. But I want you to think about a different sci-fi setting for a second here.
I did not murder him!
Isaac Asimov's first law of robotics is, no robot must harm a human being, or through inaction, allow a human being to come to harm.
That one's called anger. Ever simulate anger before?
That second part is the focus of at least one of his short stories. Robots keep getting destroyed because they perceive a harm to humans where there is none, and they keep trying to save them anyway. The interesting thing about the law of robotics is that it shows what Asimov would do if he was a god, creating intelligent life in a new world. If you could make every human obey that first law of robotics, the results would be, well, fascinating to say the least. Curly broke the first law of robotics. In Mouthwashing, Curly is told many times about Jimmy's abuse towards Anya. Anya herself implies that he has known about it long before she even realized she was pregnant. And Curly just says he will talk with Jimmy. Nothing seems to come of this talk, if it even happens at all, because when we see Jimmy's psych evaluation, it never even comes up. I don't know about you, but I'm concerned that you're sexually abusing a member of the crew. What do you have to say for yourself? Is probably something that would come to mind during that. Maybe it's just me. Now, us gamers watching this play out have no idea that Jimmy has done anything wrong during this scene. It's not even implied. All we get are reassurances from Curly that he still believes in his buddy, and Jimmy musing on some stuff that you wouldn't even notice was a red flag, unless you know what to look for. Curly, however, doesn't seem to notice anything wrong here, because he does what he has always done. He gives his friend the benefit of the doubt. He doesn't want to cause a fuss. Now, I'm not going to say that being an introvert, wanting to cause trouble, or even being a people pleaser is necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes, like in Anya's case, it's a survival mechanism that can keep you alive. Curly himself offers some pretty good advice to Anya on accident here. PSA from Captain Curly here for a second. If you're trapped with a person who forcibly impregnated you, you're afraid will hurt you given the slightest provocation, don't tell them that you're pregnant. It won't make them change or treat you any better. Statistically, at least, you're more likely at risk of violent outbursts if your abuser knows you are pregnant. The reason is because the existence of the pregnancy forces the abuser to take responsibility. This is a DASH form. It's a standardized questionnaire that domestic abuse services in the UK use to ascertain the level of risk in an abusive relationship. By doing this, you'll know whether this needs to be escalated to an immediate safeguarding risk, with the police involved and stuff. In general, if you get over 14 or so yes answers, or if you hit these particular questions, your case gets bumped up to a MARAC, a risk assessment meeting between social workers, domestic abuse support, and the police. If Curly had ever used one of these things, or if he had done whatever the space trucker equivalent of Googling is to help find these things, he might have known the danger Anya was in. He might have been able to stop it. He might have even put Jimmy in a cryopod to stay there for a few years until they get back to Earth, so all of this could be resolved in the court of law. There are so many moments that if he had just done one thing differently. But in the end, he didn't. He refused to act, refused to cause trouble, refused to make a fuss. He gave his friend the benefit of the doubt. Curly is an enabler because he chose to put his fear of losing that friend, a person who was abusive to him as well, above the fear of a vulnerable person under his care getting hurt. And in the end, his inaction gets them all killed. There are more Jimmys in the world than you think. A lot more. And the spectrum of how they behave is a lot broader than most people perceive. Jimmy never threatens Anya with violence, but he manages to make her afraid of him regardless. If your only frame of reference for domestic abuse is a guy in a white vest punching his wife because they ran out of beer, the flags are easy to miss. The tragedy of mouthwashing, however, is not that there are lots of Jimmys lurking in the shadows of the world, waiting to make their insecurity someone else's problem. The real tragedy is Curly, because without people like him, people who could help but were afraid to, the Jimmys of the world wouldn't be able to get away with it. And the world is full of Curlys. Does Curly deserve his fate? Unable to move, speak, feed himself? Forced to watch with a single eye that he cannot close as everyone around him suffers and dies? I don't think so. But that's what it feels like, being an enabler. When you know that you enabled a person who did so much damage and that you could have stopped them, but didn't, this is what it feels like. You were too late. Now all you can do is watch the consequences of your ignorance and... yeah. The lesson of this little slice of horror is not that we should avoid being Jimmy. That much is obvious. The internet has already branded him one of the worst villains in gaming for good reason. If you are like Jimmy, even a little bit, the correct advice is right there. Take responsibility, let go of your needy control freak bullshit, and take the hard steps needed to fix your behavior. For the rest of us, the lesson is that it's far easier for a good person to become a Curly, and that it's so easy to fall into inaction around an abuser if they manage to convince you that you're a friend, someone they rely on. I think all of us in some way have been a Curly at some point in our lives. Not acting when we could have, or should have. Placing too much trust in people we have known for a long time. Not wanting to approach extreme emotional situations out of fear. This game, to me at least, is more than just a lesson in red flags and how abusers behave, but a much more chilling reveal of the way enablers behave, and the consequences of not acting against that impulse.
Apathy is death. Worse than death.
Apathy is death.
Apathy is death.
It takes effort, knowledge, and understanding to avoid becoming an enabler. It really does. You don't learn this stuff in school, as much as I wish we did. In that spirit, I'm putting some resources to help you in the description below. Take a look. You never know when it might come in handy someday. Curly didn't have the knowledge or courage to stop what was happening, and it cost him everything. His fate tells us plainly and simply that if you're not vigilant about preventing abuse, with your friends as much as your enemies, you may wake up one day and find it's too late to do anything but watch.